Can I ask you a question? Who are you trying to become? Just take a moment and really think about it. Because if you're anything like I was, your answer probably sounds something like this. I want to become more confident. I want to become calmer. I want to become more successful. I want to become healthier. I want to become a better leader, a better partner, a better parent, a better version of myself. We've been taught our whole lives that transformation is about becoming someone new. But what if we've been asking the wrong question? What if healing isn't about becoming? What if it's about revealing? What if the truest version of you has never been missing, only buried beneath years of conditioning, survival strategies, identities, and beliefs that were never really yours? What if your soul has never needed improvement, only expression? Today, I want to explore one of the biggest shifts that have ever happened in my own work. Because I no longer believe our purpose is to build a better self. I believe our purpose is to remember who we've always been. So stay with me, because I think this one shift has the power to completely change the way you see your healing journey. Hello, and welcome to the Aligned Human Project. I'm your host, Dawn Elgin. If you've ever looked around at your life that appears successful on the outside, but feels disconnected on the inside, you are in the right place. If you've ever wondered why you keep repeating the same patterns, carrying the same emotional weight, or chasing goals that never quite bring you the peace you hope they would, you are in the right place. This podcast is about remembering who you were before the world told you who you needed to be. Together, we'll explore the intersection of neuroscience, psychology, ancient wisdom, quantum science, and practical spiritualism to understand how awareness shapes our field and how our field shapes our lives, and why lasting change begins from the inside out. We'll talk about leadership, relationships, health, purpose, emotional well-being, and conscious creation, not as separate parts of life, but as reflections of one thing, our level of alignment. Because most people don't need another strategy. They need a new relationship with themselves. So whether you're leading a business, a family, a team, or simply trying to lead yourself with greater intention, welcome. Take a breath, become the witness, and let's begin. Hello, and welcome back to the Aligned Human Project. If you're new here, my name is Dawn Elgin, and I am the creator of Field and Form, the 12 Laws of Co-Creation, as well as the Aligned Human Project. And my work is about helping people move from survival mindset to alignment mindset so they can consciously create lives, relationships, businesses, and organizations that are built from coherence instead of conditioning. Over the last few weeks, we've been walking a path together. First, we turned on the light, awareness. Then we stepped into the room, we got the pause. And then we began noticing the beliefs, identities, and survival patterns we'd been carrying for years. We learned that awareness doesn't change our lives. Awareness changes what becomes available to choose. Then we asked a deeper question. If these identities aren't who I truly am, who am I without them? Today, I think we arrive at one of the most beautiful questions in this entire journey. Not who do I want to become, but who is trying to emerge? Can you feel the difference? One question assumes you're incomplete. The other assumes something whole has been waiting patiently beneath everything you've ever been carrying. And that distinction changes everything. I know that most of us have approached personal growth like we're trying to build a new house. We read another book, take another course, get another certification, become more disciplined, more productive, more confident, more spiritual, more successful. And please hear me. There's absolutely nothing wrong with learning. I love learning. If you've followed me for any length of time, you know I'm constantly studying neuroscience and psychology, leadership, spirituality, psychoneuroimmunology, ancient wisdom traditions. I genuinely love learning. But a few weeks ago, I had a realization that stopped me in my tracks. I wondered how much of my learning comes from curiosity and how much has come from trying to prove my legitimacy. That question hit me hard because I realized there was an old identity quietly organizing my choices, not the identity of a lifelong learner, the identity of someone who believed she had to keep proving she was enough. Suddenly, all of those certifications looked different. The learning wasn't the problem. The meaning beneath it definitely was. That's what awareness does. It doesn't judge the action. It reveals the identity that's driving the action. And once you see the identity, you still have a choice. You can keep feeding it, or you can thank it for how it protected you and begin asking a different question. Not, how do I become more? Instead, who is trying to emerge if I stop needing to prove myself? Just let that sink. It's not a small shift. That's a completely different way of living. Let's look at why this question is so powerful. One of the brain's primary jobs is to create a stable sense of self. Psychologists describe this as our self-schema or narrative identity. Over time, the brain gathers experiences and organizes them into a story. I'm the responsible one. I'm the achiever. I'm the peacemaker. I'm the perfectionist. I'm the one who always has to stay strong. And those stories, they helped us navigate the world because they created predictability. The challenge is that the brain doesn't always distinguish between who we truly are and who we learned to become. It simply protects whatever's been repeated often enough to feel familiar. That's why identity change can feel so uncomfortable. You're not just changing a habit. You're changing the brain to revise its understanding of you. But here's where I believe science and spirituality beautifully meet. Neuroscience explains how the story was built. Field and form asks a deeper question. Who is aware of the story? The witness. The witness has never been anxious, never been broken, never been unworthy. The witness simply observes, patiently waiting for us to realize the story is not the storyteller. The identity is not the self. And when that realization begins to settle into your body, healing no longer feels like constructing a new version of yourself. It becomes the compassionate practice of uncovering the one who's been there all along. So today I want to share with you a story of what I've been going through for the last few weeks, a couple months, I guess now. And last summer, I had been dealing with wounds with my mother, and a bunch of deep, deep wounds had come up regarding I'm an inconvenience. And I thought that they belonged or started when I was in school. And when we looked at it and kept going deeper and deeper, it came forward that it was actually about my childhood and believing that my entire life was an inconvenience. I actually refer to last summer as the summer of inconvenience because that was the wounds that I was working on. So as I've gone through this journey, I used to ask to be triggered. Now I ask a bit gentler of the question and ask, show me. Show me what I need to let go of next. Show me what's interfering with my purpose, what's interfering with what it is I'm trying to create, with embodying my spirit, myself. And so one thing you maybe don't know about me is that I was raised by a single mom as an only child. And I was raised in the 70s this way, which is, again, why I always believed and felt that I was an inconvenience. So what I don't often share is that I never knew who my dad was. So I often will refer to this as the sperm donor, because it's hard for me to wrap my head around the words of dad or father when somebody hasn't even been there. And in my family, there was a divide. There was the person that my mom said who was my father, and then there was everyone else in my family who said, that's not true. This is who your dad is. So my mom had an affair. She had an affair for a long time, and this person was the love of her life. And when she got pregnant with me, she moved away from where she had lived and then moved back in with her family. And I had always felt a sense of shame around my beginnings. And you don't really think about them much. Life goes on. I thought about them lots when I was younger, but as I've gotten older and older, it's just been something that's just part of the journey and part of the beginning of the story. So I haven't really delved into it too much. But my mom passed away last January, hence the year of really deepening into those wounds and finding a lot of compassion and a lot of empathy. And so as I was going through this journey this year, I was talking to a friend who was adopted, and we were discussing the concept of finding out who your parent was and whether or not you reach out to them, especially if they haven't asked or said they want you to reach out. So we were having this discussion, and I had made the comment that about not really knowing who my dad was. It could be this person, or it could be this person. And so before my mom had passed away, I had once again pushed to try and find out who's my dad. And my mom got really upset, and she's like, I already told you who he was. And I said, well, what's his name? She's like, I gave you his driver's license. And she gave it to me when I was in my late teens, early 20s. And I'd lost it moving, around. And I'd lost this driver's license that was supposedly belonged to my sperm donor. And recently, or when I asked her this question, I said, well, I lost that driver's license. What was his last name? And she said, I don't remember. And I said, let me understand this. You have a child, one child, and you had it with this person that you lived with, and you don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of the person you had a child with. And my mom wouldn't talk to me about it. She shut down. And so at that point, I realized it probably wasn't true, and my family was probably correct. And so I was talking to my girlfriends about this, and when I said who this person was, I knew their first name and the company that they owned. And my girlfriend said, oh, I know who that is. I used to work for them. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah, I told you this. Anyways, goes on. She did not tell me this. And she pulls up the person's name. And she pulls up that they're still the CEO of their company. And she's like, you should reach out. And I'm like, I am not reaching out. This was based on an affair. Like, this person has children. They're married still. Like, why would I blow up someone's life just for my curiosity or trying to understand something? And I said, I'm not going to do that kind of harm. It just goes against what I believe in. Anyways, we're driving home later. She said to me, I think the reason that you don't want to reach out is because you have a fear of rejection. I'm like, fear of rejection? This person's known I exist. My mother and him had a long-term affair. He met me up until I think it was in my early teens. So the rejection's already happened. Anyways, we fast forward. I've kind of been struggling with this, and I was struggling with it for weeks. And it's just sitting there. Like, do I reach out? Do I write a letter? Do I do something? Do I do 23andMe? What do I do? And really struggling with the whole idea. Anyways, I kind of have it sitting on the back burner as something for me to figure out, and I'm not going to push it until I get a knowing of what I need to do. And I'm working on something with my work, and I'm finding myself struggling, and it's not like self-sabotage, but I'm definitely blocking myself in in doing some reach out. And so I'm talking to my coach about it, and I have a coach and I have another coach slash psychotherapist that I work with, and we both have the same coach. So I'm talking about this. She reaches out and she says, "Do you want to do some tapping on this?" And I said, "You know what? Actually, yeah, let's do that." So we book a session, and she said, "Do you think that this is about a fear of rejection?" And I said, "What is ever that with everybody saying this thing about me having a fear of rejection?" So we've worked through fear of rejection. I don't think that that's what it is. It's not what it feels like. I'm not sure what it is. There's something there, but I don't think it's that. And she's like, "Well, what do you mean everybody keeps saying this to you?" So, and we've worked together for quite a while now. And told her about what had been going on for the last few weeks with finding out the possible name of my possible sperm donor. And she's like, "This is huge, Dawn." And she said, "You don't think you have a fear of rejection around this?" And we talk it through. She's like, "You maybe didn't know," all sorts of stuff. And I was like, "Yeah, okay, that's fair." And she understands my position, with my values and where I'm at in my life, what I'm looking for, because I don't need anything from this person. So why cause pain? So we're tapping on it. And she's asking questions and we're working through, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm not getting triggered by a fear of rejection. That's not coming up." And finally she's like, we're testing. And she makes a comment, and she sees my reaction, and she said, "What came up there for you?" And I said, "Well, my what came up right there was shame. You made a comment and the word shame came up. And the thing that came up with it is that I'm actually an illegitimate bastard." And she looks at me and she's like, "What did you just say?" And I said, "Oh," I said, "I'm ashamed that I'm an illegitimate bastard." And she's like, "Dawn, that's a very antiquated comment. You wouldn't hear that nowadays. You would hear that in the 70s or the 80s, which means you got that way before you would even know what that means." And I was like, "Oh, shit." So we're working through it, and she's like, "Do you think like it might be about like being scared that you don't, you're not legitimate enough. You don't have enough, whatever behind you?" And I said, "Yeah, it could be that. I've always had this thing about education, that I'm not smart enough, that, I had a hard life. I dropped out of school in grade 10. I moved out before I turned 16. I went back to school and finished and have gotten lots of credentials and stuff since, but it always kind of sits there with you. Teachers tell you that you'll never be anything unless you go to secondary school, and on it goes." And so we talk it through, and all this stuff though comes up, and we just focus on the parental side of this. And so, we're releasing, and I'm pretty raw. I'm raw that night. I'm pretty triggered that night by a whole bunch of things that are going on. And I am edgy. I'm angry. And it'll take me a couple of days, like till the next day, to realize like, "Oh, you're so edgy because you've been doing all this energy work. So of course you were." Um, so then fast forward, I go through a day of work, I do some speaking, and then it's Friday, and I have a meeting with my really good friend, one of my best friends, who's also my business partner. And I'm telling her about these last few weeks because we haven't really had a chance to catch up on this stuff. So I tell her about the finding out about him. She asks questions about whether or not I'll reach out. And then I tell her about the energy work I'd done on Tuesday and being emotionally dysregulated, because it was a big deal. I told my staff when we did a field check-in with each other, and we do these field checks. How are you feeling this morning? So we know what everybody's bringing into the day, and we can support each other if we're having a hard day. So anyways, I rarely say that anything beyond, I might be irritated or frustrated or angry, but it's rare that I say that I'm emotional. And so this time I said, "You know what? I'm really emotionally fragile. My emotions are on the very surface. I need to really ground and center. I don't have a lot of capacity today. I just need to really stay centered so that I can, support the people that are coming in." My team was awesome. They jumped right in, big hugs. "We've got you." And they're ready to help out. So I'm telling her about this, and I tell her about this belief about being the absolute shame and guilt about my existence, about being illegitimate, and these words that came out. And she's listening, and she is like so heart centered. She's a fire earth energy. Like she's so connection and empathic. She's a beautiful, beautiful soul. And she said, "Wow. Well, that really explains your drive for all of like your certifications and everything." And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, it explains that you have this deep need to feel legitimate. And in that moment, I was stunned. I didn't see it. See, that's the thing about this work. We can do it all day with everybody else, but there's a reason why, counselors have counselors and therapists have therapists and coaches have coaches and, and a mix of all of them. And the reason is because it's hard to see the forest through the trees. It never even occurred to me that part of why, I knew it was a worthiness thing, but now you start getting into the deeper words and the awareness that was revealed in her comment. And I just sat with it and really was like, I get to start putting all this down. In that moment, it was this awareness of how this old wound that I wasn't even aware was there. This has been sitting in the corner in a trunk in a corner of my room since I was born. I had no idea it was sitting there. I've been piling shit on top of it. Never even thought, what the frick is in that trunk? And so here we are. And so the surface behaviors that we have can look healthy and admirable because I do love learning. I love understanding things. I love sharing that information with other people. I love human behavior. Behavioral psychology just fascinates me. I love the spiritual aspects of the elements and how these energies are behaving and interacting and organizing so that consciousness as creation can experience itself. I love this shit. I live and breathe it. But there was an underlying drive, especially in the beginning, and especially even in my work for like when I'm reaching out, where I wasn't aware of this need to feel legitimate and the fear of like, what if I don't feel legitimate or they don't think I'm legitimate and how that was interfering with me. So the surface behavior can look very healthy and very admirable. But awareness revealed the identity beneath the behavior. And the identity had been formed decades earlier from meaning, not from truth. And compassion replaced self-judgment because I understood why that identity existed. The deeper question became, if I no longer need to prove I'm legitimate, then who is trying to emerge? Maybe that's the invitation for all of us, not to become someone different, but to lovingly uncover the person we've been protecting all along. I'd like to offer you a picture that has stayed with me for, years. It's the story of Michelangelo. People often asked him how he created the statue of David. And his response has been paraphrased many different ways over the years. But the essence of it was this: David was already inside the marble. My job was to simply remove everything that wasn't David. Now, whether those are his exact words or not, I don't know. But the wisdom behind them has never left me. Because I think healing works exactly the same way. I don't believe your soul needs to be built. I don't believe the witness needs to become more loving, more worthy, more peaceful, more whole. The witness, it already is. Our work isn't to create the sculpture. Our work, the purpose of our life, is to remove everything that is hiding it. Every false belief, every inherited identity, every survival strategy that once protected us but is now preventing us from expressing who we really are. That's why I don't think healing is about adding. It's about revealing. Every time you release something that no longer belongs, you are becoming someone else. You're becoming less covered. Can you feel the difference in that? One path says, I have to become enough. And the other quietly whispers, I've always been enough. Let's look at what this means through the lens of the brain. One of the most fascinating discoveries in neuroscience is that the brain is constantly predicting who you are. Every decision you make, every interaction, every single emotion is filtered through your current model of yourself. If your identity says, I'm the one who always has to prove my worth, your brain will unconsciously notice opportunities to prove yourself. If your identity says, I'm the one who gets overlooked, your attention naturally notices moments where you feel unseen. If your identity says, I'm responsible for everybody else's happiness, you'll automatically scan your environment for other people's needs before noticing your own. And this is called predictive processing. The brain isn't simply reacting to reality. It's constantly predicting reality based on a past experience. That's why awareness is so powerful, because awareness interrupts prediction. It gives the witness an opportunity to ask, is this prediction true? Or is this simply a familiar story? That question creates space. And in that space becomes possibility. This is one of the reasons I say the witness doesn't live from prediction. The witness lives from presence. Presence is where possibility exists. Prediction keeps recreating the past. Presence makes room for the future. So a few weeks back, I was asked to do a keynote at a women's event in regards to owning the room. It was a program called Command Your Life, and somebody else was commanding your pitch, and I was commanding the room. And so teaching people how to stand up and communicate your message. And so I said, yes, no problem, I'll do this. And then I was like, I don't know how I do what I do. I had to reverse engineer what it is that I do when I show up to MC an event or to speak or to coach or to run any sort of meeting. I've been doing it for decades and I never really thought anything of it. And so I had to reverse engineer it. And in that reverse engineering, I had to really think it through and realize that commanding the room wasn't actually doing something. It was being something. See, we often think of speaking, as we need to build our confidence up. But I don't think confidence is something that first off, we're actually born with. I think because we're born with that room with all the stuff in it, it's not our natural way often. For some people, it is more natural. But how do we gain confidence? And part of the way that we actually gain confidence instead of false confidence. So sometimes we'll gain what we call false confidence by repeatedly doing something, but we're still striving and we're still in our head and we're not present in a room. However, I've told you the story before about going through the law of self-realization or radical self-responsibility, I mean. And when we have radical self-responsibility, when I took radical self-responsibility for my first marriage, for getting into it and therefore getting credit for getting out of it, in that moment, taking responsibility started to gain me self-trust. And the same thing happens for presence. So the deal was all of a sudden this realization that commanding the room wasn't about performance. It was about being present, presence over performance. And in that moment, when we're really present and we're standing there, the right words will come out. We don't have to have them perfect, but people will feel like we're speaking right to them because we are. And so there's this opportunity to get so present with giving, with how can I be of service? And when we ask that question, it just brings us into this beautiful present moment. This has not always been my way. It is when I'm present, I'm on point. But one of the things I brought up in that talk was when I haven't nailed it. And so I got this beautiful opportunity to share about the Aligned Human Project. I had 12 minutes to do it. It's a pretty big ask. You guys have heard kind of the layers of it. It's a big ask. But I was like, I'm going to nail this down. But I had no room to pause. There was no real room for me to make any errors. So fully scripted and on a teleprompter. And I was so in my head about nailing the time, nailing the tone, making sure I got every single word right, that although I nailed the language and I nailed the script, I didn't nail my energy because I was in my head. I wasn't with the people that were in the audience. And so after that talk, though, we got a Q&A. We were a bit of a panel, and a question had come out about anxiety. And I'd asked to answer the question, and now we're not scripted. And in this moment, I leaned forward and I spoke from my heart and my own experience and allowed everything just to flow through me to be of service to that person. And in that moment, there was an incredible connection. My husband, who'd been in the audience, talked about it later on, that the message was really great, stood good, everything was fine, but he just didn't feel like all of my powers there. He didn't get the same punch from me as that he would normally see. And that was hard to hear. But when I answered the last question from a panel position, he's like, oh, there she is. So I tell you this because the first thing we need to do is notice when we have an old urge to perform or prove. But then we need to pause to recognize that identity that is driving that behavior. And in that pause, we get to consciously choose from presence instead of performance. We can observe how our body relaxes and our connection deepens, and realize that authenticity creates way more impact than perfection ever could. Maybe people aren't waiting for a more impressive version of you. Maybe they're simply waiting to meet the real you. This realization completely changed how I understand the 5 elements. It just keeps deepening. For years, we've treated personality systems as if they're describing who we are. I don't see them that way anymore. I believe the 5 elements describe the different ways consciousness naturally expresses itself through human form. Think about that for a moment. Wood isn't your identity or mine. It's an expression of movement, vision, growth, courage. Fire isn't your identity. It's an expression of joy, connection, inspiration. Earth expresses nurturing, presence, support. Metal expresses discernment, integrity, wisdom. Water expresses stillness, depth, trust. These are not boxes that we are supposed to live in. They're currents, they're expressions, they're living energies. And because they're expressions, they can move, they can expand, they can contract, and they can balance. When survival takes over, those expressions become distorted. Wood becomes force and fire becomes a performance. Earth becomes self-sacrifice and metal becomes perfectionism. Water becomes hiding, a fear of being seen. But those are not the elements. Those are survival strategies expressed through the elements. Can you feel how freeing that is? You're not trying to change your element. You're allowing consciousness to express itself through that element in a more aligned way. That's a completely different conversation. It's no longer, who am I? It's, how is consciousness expressing itself through me today? And that question naturally changes every single moment of your life. So if healing isn't about becoming, and if the 5 elements are expressions rather than identities, then one question remains. How do we begin living from the person who's trying to emerge instead of the identity that's trying to survive? And that's where I would like us to finish today. So if the goal isn't becoming, what is it? I think the goal is remembering. Not remembering information, remembering your true nature. Remembering what has always been true beneath every single thing that you have been carrying. The longer I do this work, the more convinced I become that healing isn't about creating. It's about creating enough space for the soul to express itself. That's why I love the metaphor of the room. When the room is cluttered, we spend all of our energy navigating around all the furniture, the boxes, trying not to bump into old wounds, mine, yours, trying not to trip over old identities, trying not to knock over some beliefs we've been protecting for decades. Eventually, we become so accustomed to navigating the clutter that we forget the room was never meant to look like that. The room was meant to be spacious, open, alive, creative, full of possibility. It's the room of pure potential. Because an empty room isn't empty at all. It's pure potential. And that changes everything. The purpose of letting go isn't simply to have less. It's to create space for what wants to emerge. This is where field and form has become so much clearer to me. The witness observes. The field of mind organizes meaning. The 5 elements become the energetic expressions through which consciousness moves. The body becomes the instrument through which that expression enters into this world. Then form reflects what's being repeatedly expressed. Can you see the progression? Nothing in that process asks you to invent yourself. Everything invites you to express yourself. That's why I believe authenticity isn't something we achieve. It's what naturally appears when survival stops organizing our choices. When we stop trying to become, we begin allowing ourselves to be, not passive, not complacent, but present, responsive, alive. So let's go back to that keynote. When I was sitting at the table ready to go up, and the speaker was there first, she's doing your pitch. I go up, and the first thing that I do is I get up to the room. I've got my notes on a iPad. I've got slides going. One of the others is going to help me with the slides. And as I'm going through this, I have this first instinct that's there in the background of, is everybody liking me? Am I going to, do enough? Is this going to be good enough? Am I going to fit? All those things that come into play. And you notice that old identity was starting to activate. And I could feel it, which was super funny because I'm about to teach on it. I'm about to talk about it. It's literally going to be the second slide. And that's what stops so many of us from wanting to network, to be in groups, where we're like, oh, I'm just a hermit. But why? Why don't you want to be out in the world? Yes, like I'm an introvert, which often surprises people, but I am an introverted extrovert. So I require a large amount of time being quiet, with being with myself, with recuperating all of the energy and just clearing out all the noise when I have coached and produced and doing all these other things that I'm committed to. So here I am about to go up. I'm about to talk on this, and I pause. And I'm not going to judge myself for it. There's that voice in my head. I ask all of my clients to name the voices in their head. I love the practice. The practice is done so that we create space between the voice or the voices and you, the witness. You can't be the voice. You're the one that hears the voice. And so I can hear that voice that wants to come out and perform, that is worried about who likes me and who doesn't like me. And am I legitimate? Because, this talk was the day before the comment had come out about needing to feel legitimate or needing to prove that I'm legitimate. And so here this piece comes up, and I take this moment and I take a breath and I come into the space and I start looking into each person's eyes and allowed myself to simply be in that room. I started talking about how it was difficult for me to create the talk, to reverse engineer how I show up each day, and realize that the way that I show up is by having zero expectations of myself. Am I going to forget a word? The chances are extremely high. Am I going to stutter? Will I have nerves or shake? Possibly. And rather than trying to be perfect, I allow myself to be imperfectly human. I give myself the opportunity, the right to be human. So we notice the identity, but then we pause. We don't judge it. The voice was there to keep us safe, and allow ourselves to just get really present and respond from that place rather than habit. So that afterwards we can realize and become aware of how effortless it can feel when we just allow ourselves to be in flow, to be in service. So maybe being in alignment doesn't feel like becoming more powerful. Maybe what it feels like is like coming home. I believe this is true for leadership as well. The best leaders I've ever met aren't performing leadership. They're expressing who they are. There's a profound difference. One leads from identity. I need people to see me as competent, as legitimate. I need to have all the answers. I can't let them see uncertainty. Whereas the other leads from presence. I don't need to perform certainty. I need to create safety. Think about how different those two leaders feel. One creates compliance, and the other creates trust. And trust is one of the purest expressions of alignment. I've said this before, and I believe it more deeply every day. Trust is what it feels like when someone's field and form are in alignment. It's a law, the law of coherence, when there's no gap between who they are being and what they are expressing. That's the leader people follow, not because they have all the answers, because their presence feels true. And the same is true in our relationships, in our families, our friendships. People don't long for our perfection. They long for our congruence. So I'd like to leave you with a practice this week. When you notice yourself striving, performing, trying to prove, trying to earn, I just want you to pause, feel, come back into your body, your feet, your breath, and then align. Ask yourself 4 questions. What identity is trying to take over right now? What is this moment inviting me to see? Who is trying to emerge? And how would that version of me express itself within this moment? Notice that final question? Not what would they do? How would they express themselves? It's the difference between doing and being, because expression comes from being. Behavior flows from being, not the other way around. So we take one conscious breath and we choose one aligned action and trust that one brushstroke at a time creates the masterpiece. I want to leave you with one thought. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, not to criticize yourself, not to evaluate yourself, and not to decide what needs to be fixed. I just want you to simply notice. The person looking back at you has survived everything life has asked of them. Honor that. Those survival strategies, they weren't mistakes. They were acts of love. Your nervous system did exactly what it was designed to do. It protected you. Thank it. Then just gently whisper out loud or even silently to yourself, we don't need to survive this way anymore. That sentence alone can change a life because it isn't rejecting the past. It's blessing it and choosing differently. That's compassion. That's radical self-responsibility. And that is alignment. This week, I invite you to stop asking, who do I need to become? And instead ask, who is trying to emerge? Then pay attention, not just to your thoughts, but to your body, your relationships, to your joy, to the moments when you feel completely yourself. Those moments are not accidents. They're glimpses of your deepest nature expressing itself. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who's been working so hard to become enough. Maybe what they need most is permission to remember they already are. And if you'd like to explore this work more deeply, join us inside the Aligned Human Project and download the 5 Elements of Alignment Assessment. It's a beautiful place to begin recognizing the differences between survival and aligned expressions. You don't have to become the witness. You already are. You don't have to create your deepest nature. You simply have to create enough space for it to shine through. Awareness reveals. Alignment chooses. And creation expresses. The witness is the painter. The field of mind prepares the colors. The 5 elements become the movement of the brush, and the body holds that brush, the canvas of human experience. And reality becomes the masterpiece through which every conscious choice expresses. So this week, stop trying to become someone. Become curious enough to notice who's been waiting beneath it all along. Because you are the witness. You shaped your field. Your field shapes your life. Until next time. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. My hope is that you leave each episode not with more information, but with greater awareness. Because awareness is where every meaningful change begins. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who's ready to stop surviving and start living from alignment. If you'd like to continue this work, you can join us inside the Aligned Human Project community. Explore the free 5-element alignment assessment, or learn more about Align Your Life, Aligned Living, and Alignment Operating System at practicalspiritualismco.com. Remember, awareness reveals, alignment chooses, and creation follows. You are the witness. You shape the field, and the field shapes your life. Until next time, keep pausing, keep noticing, and keep choosing. I'll see you in the next episode.